One of the most pressing issues the world faces is air pollution. By 2050, climate change may threaten human existence. Are we taking climate change seriously enough? And what do we need to do to combat it? Joining me now via Skype in Germany is climate justice activist Professor Vishwas Satgar. Thank you very much for joining us. Is it true that we might no longer be here by 2050 at the rate we're going?
Well, the science is very clear that we are heating at a very rapid rate. This problem has not been taken seriously for over 2 decades. There's various reasons for this. It's got to do with very powerful interests, particularly in the carbon industry, that have ensured that this issue does not become mainstreamed in our societies. We've also had political leadership failing us at a whole host of levels. But at the same time, despite the science, despite us knowing that the window is closing very fast, there are a whole set of shifts happening right now. The one shift is that there is greater public awareness growing, and this is related to various struggles that are happening on the planet, whether it's Extinction Rebellion, whether it's the Sunrise Movement, whether it is Greta Thunberg and the children's movement, and whether it's movements in the global south that have been fighting to defend life for a long time. That's feeding into the situation right now. There's also a recognition that we need to start thinking in policy terms, in terms of addressing a just transition. So there is some good news coming out of places like Finland. They have declared that 2035 they'll be net carbon neutral. The European Union is having a very serious debate at the moment. They're the 3rd largest carbon emitter in the world. And in the course of June, I think everybody's expecting them to commit very seriously to a target of carbon neutrality. So these are some of the developments that are coming to the fore at the moment.
Okay, I mean, it's good to know that it is being taken seriously in some areas. I mean, this is the reality, though. I mean, we basically eating in plastic. We find it in the salt, in the oceans. People are dying. 9 out of 10 people are affected by air pollution. I mean, what sort of impact is that going to have on our longevity and the environment itself?
Well, you know, over 150 years of carbon-centric industrial development, whether it's not just industrialization, but also agriculture, whether it's the kind of building industries we've developed, has really created a toxic world. And you're right, you know, at least 7 million people die every year from bad air pollution. I mean, in big cities on our planet, you know, ranging from Beijing to Mexico to Delhi, etc. It's really becoming difficult spaces to live, but yet this is where the largest concentrations of people are. So we have this problem. In South Africa, you know, the World Bank put out a figure, ironically, in 2016, saying at least 20,000 people die per annum from air pollution in this country. There's been a big debate with Eskom recently about how many people it kills from its pollution. Eskom has argued it's, you know, about 520 odd people die from its pollution. Organizations like Greenpeace have contested that and argued that it's about 1,850. So there's that reality. We've also had the issue of recently with the former Minister of Environmental Affairs, Nomvula Mokonyane, wanting to jack up sulfur dioxide levels in South Africa. And, you know, unfortunately, she was pushed back by very important NGO interventions like Groundwork. But we don't have emission standards for cars, but more importantly, we have not used regulation effectively in the country. We have not moved towards a public transport system in the country. It's a big gap. And most importantly, we are not moving towards socially owned renewable energy. The big pollution issue is the global gas chamber. It is the greenhouse emissions and so on. And that's where the challenge lies.
You've got these conditions. I mean, so we're basically killing ourselves. Plastic, I believe, since plastic started, we've only been able to get rid of about 9% or, you know, make that sort of biodegradable. So, I mean, if we don't get this machine working, you know, how are we ever going to put a stop to it before more people die, before we suffocate the planet? And then how do you balance the business interests? How do you have that conversation so that people feel that they're not losing out on money, that they're being smart in this venture?
I really think that the terms of the conversation has to shift. Now, there's interesting news coming out of New Zealand, for example. The Prime Minister there has actually broken with the growth paradigm. She's actually announced a whole set of other metrics to think about the happiness of New Zealand society. And I think there's something interesting happening there. I also think that we're going to have to break with the productivist approach to how we organize societies that are resource intensive, that are just about work, that are just about growth, etc. We cannot sustain it. So if you look at the consumption footprint of the average European, from January to May this year, if you reproduce their consumption footprint, you'll need 2.5 planets, basically. If you do a similar exercise with the average American and think about the world, you're going to have 3 or 4 planets. So we are at an impasse, and we really need a whole new paradigm. We need a whole new framework. And again, if you look at the ANC's manifesto and all the political parties, I mean, none of them are thinking beyond the old, traditional, growth-centered, resource nationalism, industrialization approaches to things. That's where the problem lies. We really have to think about a new framework to sustain life.
Okay, so new paradigm shift, new framework, and what can we do? I mean, what sort of serious sacrifices do we need to take?
Well, I really think that we are at a point where we have to cut emissions dramatically. And that really means that we're going to have to rethink the entire energy transition as one big part of that. And hard choices have to be made there while protecting the interests of workers and communities. The other big issue is the carbon-centric nature of our society. Carbon's built into almost everything, what we build, the transport we use, etc., etc. We're going to have to make some hard choices around leaving some of those things behind. The way we understand the standards of life, the way we understand the comforts of life, etc. We're going to have to rethink that. We're also going to have to rethink things like food systems and water systems, etc., and really think creatively about adaptive systems that sustain life. But we are at that frontier right now. We are at that turning point in history, and it is very, very important we have the national debates, and I'm glad you're having these conversations on your show as well.
Yeah, we're going to keep them up. Now, tell me, if it gets hotter, we're going to lose more life forms and ecosystems, aren't we?
Yes, I mean, so there's 2 very important reports. I mean, the one was the UN IPCC report, 1.5 degrees Celsius, that came out in October last year. The other, of course, is the International Panel on Biodiversity. And they've been saying basically that, we are poised to lose 1 million species out of 8 million. We've destroyed 45% of ecosystems. We've reshaped at least 70% of land surface area on planet Earth. And we are really moving in a destructive direction. This is interlocked and interconnected with climate change, because as the planet heats, also as we emit more emissions, and as the planet heats, more species are going to die off. And as more species die off and as we lose biodiversity, it's going to become also increasingly difficult to adapt. At the heart of this problem also is industrial agriculture. Industrial agriculture for the greater part of the 20th century has really driven us to a point of almost ecosystems collapse. And again, this is the big debates we have to start having. What kind of food systems do we need today that will sustain life, that are ecocentric, that are, in a sense, consistent with meeting our needs, but also balancing larger considerations with non-human nature?
Salga, thank you very much. You wonder how many warnings we need to have. Now, South Africa is failing to provide inclusive education for all. More than 500,000 children with disabilities have never been to school. What must be done to stop this travesty?